Welcome to Sound Advice. Thank you everyone for being here, for coming, for taking the time out of your busy evenings to come and learn with us together about leadership in Toastmasters and elsewhere, because that's why we're in Toastmasters, is to help us learn leadership elsewhere. So if you learn leadership in Toastmasters, you're learning leadership everywhere. So come here and learn and connect to other experienced leaders and learn from the experience that we have here. We have an exciting topic tonight, conflict resolution, and we have a guest speaker brought in by our very awesome and amazing Cynthia, who is our discussion leader and Toastmaster for the evening. And so with a tremendous deal of pride in her first foray into being a Sound Advice discussion leader, please welcome Cynthia.
Thank you, James, for that awesome introduction. That was really nice. And now I hope to give an equally awesome introduction to our guest speaker, Danny Rylander. Do I go over the agenda? Okay, first let me tell you about how the agenda is going to work. We're going to have Danny speak for 30 minutes. Then we're going to do a question and answer. Then we'll take a little break because we all love them. And 2 hours is a long time on Zoom, I know. Then we do a breakout session where we're going to do a little exercise that Danny has provided. And then we have a takeaway section that Sherry's going to lead us in, and we talk about what we've learned today and what we're taking away from this marvelous information that Danny is providing us. And then there's a wrap up with the club business, and then we adjourn. So now for the introduction of Danny. Danny, I've known her for about 3 years. She's worked at Commerce Communicators, which is my home club. She does an awesome job there as a program manager. In addition, she's a mother to 5. And she is a student studying to become, I believe, a marriage and family therapist. Is that correct?
Yeah. Close enough. Mental health counselor. But yeah.
Oh, mental health counselor. To me, they're the same thing, but don't tell my husband. He might get a little cranky. But she's so graciously offered to present a section on conflict management today for us. I'm looking forward to hearing. So please join me in welcoming Danny Rylander.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for that introduction. It's so good to see everybody. And let me try to get my PowerPoint up here again. We good? Okay, thank you. So I have the pleasure of speaking to you tonight on a perfectly wonderful Thursday night light topic of conflict. Thank you so much for having me tonight. And there is so much to discuss when it comes to conflict. We face conflict in all sorts of different areas of our lives. And I'm just going to talk today about a few things that I hope will help you to understand a little bit more about what conflict is and how it shows up in you and how others respond to conflict. And I hope that you can walk away today with a couple of tips or tricks for the next time that you're in a situation that you have to deal with conflict. Okay, so as we get started, conflict is a really big term. We all think of it a little bit different. So I'm going to ask today during this interactive presentation that you all help me out a little bit to define what is conflict. So either pull up your chat or go ahead and come off mute and tell me, when we talk about and you think about conflict, what does it mean to you? What does it look like? What is conflict? If all the microphones were unmuted, we would hear all those keys clacking there. I see different opinions, absolutely. Working with someone that rubs you the wrong way, for sure. When two or more people's perspectives or priorities are appear to be mutually exclusive or in competition. So having political discussion, that's very true, especially in today's climate, isn't it? Stressful. An issue that riles your inner self. And definitely agreement, I think, with all of those different things. Yes. So someone who is ignoring everyone without a senior level title. So using their only acknowledging certain positions of authority. Absolutely. These are all different ways that conflict shows up. Are there any others that anyone wants to add? Miscommunications. Yeah, so we've talked about some things that lead to conflict. We've talked about some ways that we feel when we think about conflict here. And we've also talked about some ways that conflicts are actually showing up in our lives and that we're observing around us. Conflict. So I just want to take just a minute to put a little bit of context around conflict of how we're going to talk about it tonight. And GTS Learning, who does a lot of training for companies and management training, talked a little bit about conflict and described conflict as being more than just disagreeing on something. So we can agree, there's ways that we can disagree. And we've all seen this in the society around us with all of the big ideas and thoughts and perspectives out there today that people are very passionate about. We can see that there are circumstances where we can disagree with other people, and it doesn't necessarily lead to conflict. But there are other times when those disagreements become much bigger and they really do kind of explode into a conflict. So one of the things that GTS was clear about is that conflict also often goes beyond disagreement in the fact that it has some type of a threat associated with it. Now, this threat could be a real threat. It could be a perceived threat. It could be an unconscious threat even. But the threat, that there's this threat that kind of fuels the conflict. And I would like us to consider a little bit about how people respond when they feel threatened. So if you'll just pop in the chat or come off mute and let's talk about that for just a minute. How do people typically respond to a threat? Defensiveness, fight or
Anger, you
flight.
come out swinging.
Yes, absolutely. Just come out fighting, assuming the worst, lashing out, running away, fight, flight, freeze, and peace. Absolutely. So what happens when nervousness? Yes. And these are all responses that happen that begin well before our brain activates, right? These are starting in our nervous system. Fight, flight, freeze, and appease are things that happen before our brain is actually processing them. And when we are in those states of mind, let's think through, like, how well do we do with processing and staying calm and responding the way that we want to in control in a situation? Yes, not very well. That's not typically how we respond. In fact, I believe that the statistic is only about 5% of the population can respond in any type of emergency or threatening situation in a way that their prefrontal cortex continues to be engaged. The majority of us, up to 95% of us, really that part of our brain disengages when we feel threatened, and we respond more instinctually with whatever our perceptions are. And so, oh goodness, the chat is distracting me. You all are very funny. And thank you for your input, because it is difficult to be interactive sometimes over Zoom, but this is amazing. So our nervous systems get activated with conflict. We feel that threat, and that's in varying degrees, right? Some conflicts just activate it maybe a little bit, and we might snap back a little bit, or we might just clam up. And other times these conflicts can be really big threats, and we might respond in really big ways. So conflict affects us. It is more than just disagreement, and it can have really significant effects in our body. So thinking about these fight, flight, or freeze responses, we've learned more, I think, in society these days about adrenaline and the effects that being in a stressful state for long periods of time can have on us. And these can be in the moment effects, and they can be long-term effects. So I want you to just take just a moment, if we can, if you'll do this with me, and just close your eyes for a second. And I want you to take a minute, dig through all those files of memories, and think about a conflict that really got to you during your life. Just pick one of them. Do you have it? Okay. I want you to think about that conflict for just a second. Think about the leading up to it before any type of resolution. And notice, what are you feeling in your body? Where is that showing up for you in your body? Is there tightening? Is there stress? What is happening? What happened in response to that? All right, and I'll ask you all to kind of come back to the group now. And I'm just going to give just a minute if anybody wants to share any reflections on what that brought up for you. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, so one of the things that I have noticed is that frequently when I'm getting defensive, out of many reasons, this isn't the only reason why this happens to me, but I talk faster. Which, if you know how fast I normally talk, this is a problem. And my laughs tend to come from a more nervous, tension-breaking area as opposed to just enjoyment, like my normal laughs are. I get that cold kind of tightness in the chest, and my neck tightens up, and I lean forward and I start talking really, really fast and jumping topics and jumping in and out. And I don't wait for people to finish what they're saying, because I have to get my words in to back up my point and to appease whatever they're saying, or attack whatever they're saying, or to re-clarify or re-communicate. That tends to be the pattern.
Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. Right. So not only is it having effects in your body, but it's also affecting your ability to be able to effectively communicate with the other person, and to stop and empathize and hear what they're saying back. Absolutely. Dread, tension, headaches, not of anxieties. Absolutely. And think about the fact that you're thinking about a conflict, hopefully from some time in the past. I'm hoping that you're not having to deal with a conflict right now. And how those feelings can still come up in your body all this time later, right? And so conflict really can have a significant impact well into the future. And conflict, when it's ignored or it's not settled all the way, is very similar to being threatened and never having any type of closure to that happening. So when we ignore conflict, it affects us. It affects our well-being. It affects our physical, our mental, our spiritual states. And kind of like the saying, the body keeps the score of these things. And not only that, conflict can escalate over time. even if we think that we've kind of squashed it and pushed it aside, it can continue to escalate and come out in many different ways. There are many influencers of conflict, and we don't have time tonight to talk about all the different factors that can come in. But one of the big things that influences conflict is our personal perceptions. And we see this everywhere in the world around us right now, where personal perceptions of issues or thoughts or what's going our limited perspectives of what's going on around us can really influence whether we or how we respond and how the conflict affects us. So that's something that I think is really important to keep in mind, is that everybody's perspective when it comes to conflict is important, and it is a type of truth, their truth, your truth, right? And just to understand that all of the different pieces that we can see may be very different from the pieces that others can see. Let's talk about the other side of the coin of conflict, though. So we defined conflict in the chat, and a lot of the things that were in there were a little bit more on the challenging, maybe dare I say negative side of conflict, and the things that come up that are maybe a little more icky. But let's talk about it. If you had to describe conflict only with positive language, how would you describe it? Let's start putting that in the chat, or feel free to come off mute and talk about that. How we determine priorities. Yeah, sometimes we have to work through, here's all the options and here's what everybody is struggling with, and it really helps us kind of get down right. It helps us uncover what's most important. Yes, conflict can help us feel engaged and alive and connected. Helps us explore options and arrive at solutions. Helps us test ourselves and learn and grow. Absolutely.
Danny, find that conflict is in a way healing for me, because sometimes I don't know that I have conflict. And so when conflict comes into play, I find there's something wrong, and it allows me to start the healing process to get past whatever the conflict brought about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it kind of brings up some of those things we didn't know were kind of percolating down there, and lets us actually get resolution to them. Yeah, go ahead.
This is Mary. To just feed off that a little bit, what Cheryl said, it helps me clarify some things that I didn't realize that were important to me. One of the biggest conflicts I ever had was a coworker, and I couldn't figure out why. I was tense around her all the time, and I realized our values were so different. Once I did that, I'm like, oh, just boom, so soothed the waters.
There we go. So absolutely, helping us bring up some of those ways that we're different from each other. And, sometimes knowing our differences can really actually help us embrace other people and embrace and appreciate them more. I see honoring myself and understanding things. So many amazing things. So conflict is not just a negative thing. Conflict can be very constructive. And GTS Learning gave some really specific guidelines as to what constructive versus destructive conflict can look like. And constructive conflict leads us, a lot of this is in the results of what happened at the end. It's a little harder to evaluate as we're going. So maybe I'll ask you to think about some of the ways that we can evaluate constructive versus destructive in the moment during the conflict. So if any of that comes up, feel free to plop that in there. But when we have constructive conflict, in the end, it's going to bring us into stronger relationships, connection, understanding others, many of those things that you just expressed, and even allow us to pave the way to solve future conflicts and to grow together. We see this a lot in teams working together, volunteer work teams. We see this a lot in families. But conflict that results in deeper frustration, negative feelings, growing hostility, those are destructive things to the relationship. And that type of conflict has to be remedied and it has to be recovered from. Otherwise, it just sits and it stews and it can create damage to relationships. James, do you feel like coming off of mute and
I do,
telling
yeah.
us?
What I noted was that constructive versus destructive conflict really comes down to how we relate to it, how we engage with it. If you encounter the conflict and then you engage with it with the intentionality of seeking for connection and learning and solutions, that's what we're going to get out of it. That's how it's going to frame in our minds. It actually rewires our actual chemicals in our body in order to relate to it better that way. It becomes healing stress rather than destructive stress. If we seek for just protecting our own positions, that leads to toxicity and destruction and can actually damage our health. By doing that, it actually physiologically changes our responses when we do that, and that leads to destruction and isolation. If the way we frame the conflict in our own mindsets really transforms things.
Yes. Debbie, did you want to say anything about your thoughts in the chat?
I was thinking about the fact that a few years ago I did a conference, and when coordinating with the different folks that I had doing different things, some people really took that very well, just even the check-ins and that kind of thing. But that's where you have conflict resolution opportunities, because if somebody's not meeting milestones, I have to have a bit of a more aggressive conversation with them. However, I agree with James, where in perhaps more of my work settings, if I, for example, one of the ones that I did recently was I said, how about you give me those statistics and measurements, and then and if you can give me the source, then I can be comparing myself for success. The other party had to admit that they don't have those conflict measurements. And therefore now there is a rift between the two of us. And so that type of destructive, it's both working on progress, but one is for the win-win and the other is for win-lose.
Yes. Thank you so much. And that brings us right into our next part here. And I'm going to speed up just a little bit because this has been such a wonderful discussion and we are getting a little bit closer to our time being done. So I want to make sure we get to some of our actual tips for the resolution part. But thank you so much, Debbie, for bringing up the win, lose, and win-win. Now, there are 5 different ways that are generally thought of to address a conflict, and none of them are right versus wrong. They all work differently for different parts or for different ways. For different results that you want to get out of the conversation, out of the situation. You can not do anything at all. You can say, absolutely not. I will not back down and win. I do that sometimes. Actually, I do all of these sometimes as a parent. You can just give in and walk away. Sometimes that's the right way to do it for you in the moment. You can say, you know what, we're both going to give something up and then this is just going to be done. Or the preferred method that a lot of conflict resolution teachers talk about is the win-win. And the win-win is often the ideal situation, but not always the right situation for you in the moment. So please note that however you choose to handle it, whichever one of these strategies you choose to use, I think what James said about intention, doing it intentionally can really make a big difference. So what happens though when conflict comes up? Yes, and James, thank you for that. Any of those scenarios can be a win if you have the time to learn from it. Absolutely. So the best time to plan for conflict resolution, as we've discussed earlier, is not in the middle of your adrenaline and nervous system reaction, right? It's to plan and address it before you ever even get into the conflict. So there are 4 things that I recommend that you take some time to evaluate for yourself. These are different for everyone. The first one would be the signals. James talked a little bit, and some of the rest of you talked a little bit earlier about some of the things that you feel in your body when you're coming to a point in a conflict where it's getting past disagreement and starting to engage in a situation that's not healthy or feels threatening for yourself or maybe for another person. So what are those things? It's important to identify those. The next part is to ask yourself, when you do recognize those signals, what is the right next step? When I recognize these signals, do I need to walk away from the situation? Do I need to just, am I able to just take a deep breath and calm myself down and cool myself down? What are the methods that you can use successfully to help yourself cool down and come back to the situation? What are the insights? So taking a couple minutes to check in for yourself, what did I need out of this? This was escalating. What did I actually want? What is the best strategy I can use to communicate my concerns? And then what is my plan to re-enter the topic after I've taken a cool down, either moment or maybe a day or a week sometimes, depending on the conflict? What is the best way? Do I need to start with some small talk and kind of lead up to this? Is that my style, or is my style more like I need to stop and say, hey, I need to talk about this thing and go right into it? These are things that I think each one of us needs to evaluate based on our own personality and preferences. And this plan is something that we're learning, right? Conflict resolution is a skill that we're learning. And so this is an iterative process. It's something that needs to be evaluated over and over and over again. So how do we resolve conflict? We come to a situation and here's the big moment, right? We've come to this conflict. We kind of have our plan. What are the actual tips? Now, there are hundreds of tips out there for how to resolve conflict, and it's hard to whittle it down. But after doing quite a bit of reading and research and reading some studies about like what are the most important things to help us really engage and come to a good resolution, these are the tips that I've kind of picked out, and they're in order. So the first one we've talked about a little bit is to calm yourself down. If we're triggered, we're not really able to do this. So I've provided a handout that I believe James will be sending out to everyone. And it's called, it's called General Coping Thoughts When Things Get Messy. And it has some really neat affirmations that you can practice. And there's a lot of different ones that you can practice so that when you come into one of these situations, you can just repeat that mantra and calm yourself down. And the next one is to check yourself. And I also provided a handout called Are You a Bridge or a Barrier? I have a slide and I was going to go over some of those, but I think maybe we'll have an opportunity in the breakout rooms to explore that if we want to a little bit later. That handout gives some ideas about, are you helping the process or are you creating barriers in the process? By examining your body language, your words that you're using, and your intentions and thoughts. What is the actual problem versus what is being said, right? What is the actual conflict about? And what is the source? Some questions you can ask yourself are, when did I first start feeling upset? How did this actually begin? And the most important thing about defining the problem and its source is curiosity, approaching it with curiosity. Next, you're going to generate some possible solutions and evaluate them to understand how well do each of those solutions meet both parties' needs. And then it is recommended that there is an official agreement at the end of the conflict resolution process. This can be as simple as conflict with your 2-year-old and making a commitment to each other that you're going to try something or try again to reset, etc. Or it can be an official contract, a handshake, something that really signifies that both parties are in agreement with the resolution. We're going to have a chance in our breakout rooms after a while to actually apply some of this process to a conflict. So you'll have some chance to practice and engage. Oh, let's see here. I'm going to move forward just a little bit. And I'm actually going to go ahead and leave this slide here for you to read for a moment, because this is going to be the instructions for our breakout rooms. But it's my understanding with the agenda that we're going to have a couple of activities in the agenda before we go into breakout rooms. So I'm going to end here on the note of, we talked a little bit about what conflict looked like. We talked about ways that it shows up and it affects us. I gave you some tips and ways that you can come at conflict to hopefully help you resolve the conflict versus allow it to escalate or to continue to affect you. I would love to hear from any of you on the topic of these tips or this process to resolve conflict. Was there anything that this brought up for you? Any questions?
This is Mary.
Mary?
Some of what this brought up for me was this is a really nice process when there's kind of an equal power structure in play. I can think that there might be a different way to approach something when there is a power at play, when there is a power structure difference. So it's a conflict between manager, employee. So just, I don't know if you had any comments about that, or I probably don't have time to go into it tonight, but just, yeah, so I put that out.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. That is absolutely, I think a really common situation and challenging. And I wonder too, I think we're going to have a question and answer session here in a little bit for, and so I think we can definitely see if others have some insight into that. And I think that this process can be used with two people, and it can also be used individually. And I think that one thing that it can do is, it's not necessary, the end result isn't always necessarily a win-win, right? Sometimes when we have a power dynamic, or we have another party that's not willing to enter into this with the intention of resolution, sometimes we have to choose one of those other conflict resolution methods. But having the moment to kind of go through all of this, these steps just still gives us perspective about the situation and where the other person is coming from, and really helps us evaluate which method is the right one to move forward. So thank you for bringing that up. I would love to hear from others too. Well, thank you everyone for letting me come and speak on this topic. It is a big and challenging topic, and I hope that there was some good tips for you all. And I will be back with you in a little bit for breakout. Cynthia, am I turning it over to you? You're muted.
Still muted. Stupid mouse. We're going to go into question and answer, and so people who have questions can ask you. So.
And how much time do we have for this, Cynthia?
It's 6:38 to, 6:58 to 7:13.
Okay, so we have roughly 10 more minutes. Thank you.
Okay, I apologize. I think I misunderstood I thought that we were doing a panel, but I am happy to answer questions, and I would love to also open that up to discussion. So if you have thoughts, let's start with Mary's question. What other thoughts do we have about that? Go ahead, James.
I did actually think about something relevant specifically to Mary's comment. it flashed me immediately back to thinking about Viktor Frankel in Man's Search for Meaning, who was a psychologist who went through a concentration camp during Nazi Germany. And he had absolutely no power, like the least power you can possibly imagine on planet Earth, in the worst possible position. And yet, he found hope. He found a way to conquer and to be productive, to find meaning in life, and even joy during that time by following these kinds of conflict resolution principles writ large, very large. When you don't have a power gap, you look at what do I have power over? And one thing we always have power over is our own responses, our own emotional responses, how we take the lack of power, the injustice or the outright evil, that's the kind of taking something in the most extreme possible situation, and say, I am going to choose hope, regardless of all of that, and become stronger through it. I'm going to become a better person, and I'm going to have empathy for this evil person who is hurting and destroying people. I can choose to love, despite that. It's a heroic and martyric and supernatural, really, to do that. But it is part of the human superpower. It is something that we are given to do. And so even in those kinds of circumstances, this kind of principle of stopping and thinking, what can I do? What are my options? Where do I have liberty and power? And what do I want to do? What are my priorities? What are my intentions? And then coming back into the situation with intentionality rather than just simply reacting to what's happening around you willy-nilly. It's the same principle. It's the same thought process and some same pattern. So I think, whether you're dealing with, your kids who don't want to eat broccoli or going through a concentration camp, it's funny how it's the same behavior patterns apply to both. I think it's a universal principle that you're bringing forward here. That's really important. I think there's really no end to the application and the levels of maturity that are there to be developed in being able to apply this, because I know I'm not that strong. If I was in that kind of situation, I can trust that I would be given the grace to be that strong. But I don't have that strength now because I don't need it right now. That's how life works. But it's the same skill set. Those are just my immediate thoughts that came to mind when Mary proposed that particular question.
Well, I think there's some cases where you're dealing with power differentials, such as the example that comes to mind for me is in domestic violence divorce cases.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely have a power differential in that. And one of the things I know in my work as a volunteer for the Volunteer Legal Clinic is if you come up against that situation, you are not doing a collaborative divorce. Because you will not get the results because the parties are assumed not to be in good faith. So it's not, in that case, the conflict resolution, it goes down the more traditional court standard than collaboratively.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it kind of brings us back to those different ways of resolving conflict, where in my work with clients who had dealt with domestic violence situations, I would often see them choose maybe an ignoring or backing away from the situation, or a lose-win where they would lose out and just allow the other person to win. And there were times in my life where I thought, no, I want you to be empowered. But the truth of the matter was that was what would work for them to allow them to get out of the situation. So I think there's also a really good point that brings up about being able to have and hold grace for others and their choices. So sometimes we may want to engage in a win-win situation, but maybe the other person is in a win-lose, and that's where they're at that time. And in those circumstances, I mean, does anyone have thoughts about, when you're coming to that type of situation, you've got a conflict on top of a conflict. What are some ways that, that we can think differently about that? Go
James?
ahead. Yeah.
I don't use them all the time. I really like that posing of that question, though, is when you have a conflict, about how to manage conflict is kind of what you're saying, right? When one person is aiming for a win-win and the person's aiming for a win-lose, what does that actually look like? And I think one of the other principles that you brought up earlier in your speech, I think is really, really critical. It is the listening, understanding, and empathizing with the other person, really intentionally investigating, like setting aside the conflict and exploring. Because you have a breakdown in alignment there, and you can't really come to any conclusion without actual alignment of any sort. So you need to get some alignment. So the only way you can get that is through exploration. You got to go explore, dig, ask questions, build trust so that you can actually get an actual authentic revelation of what they're actually going for, so that you can communicate about those priorities. Even if things are falling apart, you can always learn more and be better able to connect and resolve something more effectively that way.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes part of the resolution is coming to the part where we realize there isn't going to be resolution.
Absolutely.
In certain circumstances, and being able to accept that, but having gone through the intentional process of really understanding the interests and what each person kind of is aiming for, etc., maybe will help us to accept that and feel like we had some say in that as well.
All right, it is 7:13 and we're seeing the red flag here. We did want to take a 5-minute break because we all know you need to go get some water and maybe use the facilities and relax for a second before we get into the breakout session. So I'll see you back here in 7:18.
5 minutes. Well, we are back from break. We have the red card there. Thank you so much, Judy. And so take it away, Cynthia, with the second half of the meeting.
All right. Next up, we're going to do the breakout session, and I'm going to turn it back to Danny to explain what we're going to do. Yay.
The unmute button moved. Can you all see just the win-win waltz worksheet? Okay. So what we're going to do in our breakout session is we have an opportunity to put together the steps for conflict resolution that we talked about earlier. Now, at this point in time, you're probably already, hopefully, a little bit calmed down. And so we're going to start. I want you just to take a minute to think about where you're at, like how you're feeling, get that awareness. And then we're going to work through the steps of thinking through the position of each person. And that is going to go up here. I'm going to tell you where we're going to get the scenarios from in a minute. I'm just going to go through the worksheet here that you can use. You can use the worksheet or you can do it not in the worksheet, but there is a link to this in the chat once you get in your group, if you'd like to pull that up for reference. So in the conflict, each person's position and then their underlying concerns are going to be those things that are important to them. So you have a scenario. I'm going to go to a really easy way to apply this. It's not a big conflict. And in that situation, let's say Dave wants to sell a car. He lists it for $9,000. Somebody counter offers him for $7,000. He has to resolve this difference between $9,000 and $7,000. What's he going to do? So the first thing he's going to do is he's going to think about what's important to me. Like, what do I want to know about this? I want to get a good value for the car. I want to know that the car is well taken care of by the next owner. This car is special to me. I want to make sure that, et cetera, right? The values that he has about the situation. And then we're going to think through, what about the buyer? The buyer wants a really good deal for what they're getting. They want to make sure the car is working in good running order. They want to be able to trust the seller. So those are the values that they're coming at it with. And that's what will go into the specifics. This is a little subjective in the case when we're looking at a scenario, but just do your best to get some things in there of what you think might be coming up for that person, for each party. And then down at the next spot, we're going to go into the generating some solutions. So we kind of know what the values are, and then we're going to try to start brainstorming what are some solutions that could potentially meet one or both person's values or needs here in the circumstance. And at the initial stages, don't take too long on this, but at the initial stages, you're going to get creative and a little bit more out of the box. So your ideas might not be the ideal idea. And that's good, because thinking outside of the box is what is needed when we're brainstorming and generating, right? And then down at the bottom of the page here, you're going to think through the scenarios, the ideas, the solutions that you've come up with. And you're going to put down here, it says new idea altogether. What I would like you to do is to put in there, what is, of all the solutions that you came up with, what's the best one? What do you feel like the best one is to solve the problem? Does that make sense to everyone? Is there any questions about that worksheet? Not seeing any. So what we're going to do for the scenarios is James is going to send us out into breakout groups of 3. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, earlier in the session, I had you envision a conflict that you've dealt with in the past. And I'm going to ask if a brave soul from each group would be willing to share. You don't have to share all the details. You can even make it from a third party perspective and not personal if you want, but share either that conflict or another conflict that you have interacted with in the past, or that you know someone close to you has had, as the scenario for this. And so you're going to have to, whoever gives up the conflict is going to have to take a little bit of a step back from what happened in history, right? And maybe look through it from a fresh lens here. But is that okay with everyone? Is that doable? Okay. So any other questions before we go to the breakout room?
And I will be doing a small screen share. I'm going to post really quickly in the chat, just so it's referenced there, the instructions for the exercise. You can, of course, grab the worksheet and view that as well. But I will do a screen share of these notes as well into all the breakout rooms, so they're available for you to see. And you'll have 20 minutes. So have a lot of fun. Nice. As they come back in. Number 2 is having a lively conversation, it seems. I always like that when you did a really good job on the timing and on the topic, when there's 1 or 2 of the rooms that they just hang on till the last second until they're forced to pop out. Oh man.
So for the takeaways, I can give cards again, green at 13, yellow at 14, red at 15.
Sounds good to me.
Hey,
Does that work for you, Cynthia?
It's actually Sherry who's doing the takeaways.
Oh, true. Yes. Does that work for Sherry?
Didn't realize that it was me up. So hello.
Yeah, it's your go now.
Okay, well, we had a good time in breakout sessions. Hopefully everyone did. And who wants to start with talking about their takeaway, especially we're talking about takeaways from the whole meeting or what we learned in our breakout sessions? I guess it can be either one. So
Yeah.
who wants to start that off?
I can start it off, Sherry. In our breakout session, we had the insight that many conflicts, most maybe, are from misunderstandings or miscommunication. Once you clear up what each person wants, that helps, that either resolves it or certainly helps toward resolving it.
Oh, that's such a good point. I think we forget about, sometimes we think that there's a misunderstanding and then we realize that we have more in common than we thought we did, that maybe we misunderstood what the misunderstanding was. So yeah, good. It's always good to get that out in the open. Who else would like to share?
Sherry,
Mary, thank you.
Thank you. I shared my scenario and found myself like wanting to give more details so I could look like I was in the right. Like and then when I gave that up, I really appreciated having a dispassionate conversation where we came up with a whole bunch of solutions that I would never have thought of. And so then it led me to think like more deeply about, well, what is important about what my position, why is that important? So then it just kind of kept adding to the flavor and depth of the conversation. Oh, that's why. Oh, well, it isn't really about this issue. This is really the issue for me. Now that could be a whole different set of excuse me, solutions. Yeah, so it's helpful.
Oh, good. Thank you for that. Yes, I think that I enjoy having the feedback from my group around me and getting those ideas, and it makes me realize, oh, I didn't think about that. And yeah, that would really help me in being able to resolve this. And right, good ideas.
So you guys, when we were in our breakout group, we actually ended up having an extra participant because my niece is here staying with me since I had my accident, so she could take care of me. And she actually was listening and kind of got in on the solution. So it was kind of interesting. It was fun. All of a sudden she had a solution. And so it was kind of nice that she did that and felt comfortable doing that. So
That's great, Cheryl. Thank you for sharing that. I know that sometimes we don't want the group to be too big, but definitely a few people can generate ideas. And I have a group that is my mentor group. We've been meeting for ages, and it just is amazing the kind of ideas that we can come up with, just brainstorming off of each other, things that we never would have thought of. And some of them have come up with actually starting new clubs in different ways. So yeah, lots of good ideas. Who else would like to share?
Could I ask a quick question?
Yes,
Because
James.
Cheryl, you commented, or was it Cheryl or Sherry recently, just in this last exchange, commented about that if that the conversation felt safe for Cheryl, your niece, you said, to be able to speak up and participate and share solutions, right?
yes, it was.
That's such a huge thing, is that the person has to feel safe in order to contribute and provide solutions, which goes back to that whole defensive mindset and whatnot. And I'm curious, about takeaways that people might think, well, what are ways that we can help each other feel safe in times of conflict to provide those solutions? So maybe insights from in the conversations you just had, where you were sharing solutions, what made you feel that that was safe?
I think one of the reasons why I think I feel safe is that there's no tension, there's no outlying like feeling like there's anger or any conflict going on. We're just having conversation. So when you don't have that conflict, you can put that conflict behind you, the whole idea of the conflict or the attitude of the conflict, and just talk back and forth. It makes you a lot safer. And so if you can put the conflict behind and just talk about solutions and whatever, and not, Mary didn't seem to be like agitated that we were coming up with solutions that may not be necessarily what she wanted. And I think that's a lot of it, because that's where I feel like sometimes if I'm in a conflict, I cannot get a solution if I feel like the anger is still there or the tension is still there. So if there's a way to get rid of that tension and that anger and just communicate back and forth, and sometimes it takes something to stop it. Like one of my problems is I can tell I'm in conflict if I start getting loud and start like yelling, and not having an argument or anger, but just loud. I just get loud because I get so intense, so that's, if you can get away from that, I think that makes it a way for it to feel safe.
Thanks, Cheryl. I think I'm like you in that I get louder if I'm in conflict situation. And James was saying that he speaks faster. And so we all kind of have those little things that the ways we react. And maybe that's a key to wanting us to stop and take a breath and do all these little exercises that Danny was telling us about, and try to think about how we can resolve it, how we can talk about it without it being a conflict, and just get the information.
Now, one thing I started doing, because I have a tendency to get that intense, feeling and whatever, and feel like there's a conflict, and I get loud. If I'm talking with somebody, or a lot of the people like I work with, I will tell them, if I start getting loud, just say, go ahead and stop and say you're getting loud, because I don't realize it. And there may be a reason for it, but if somebody brings it to my attention and I lower my voice, I then become less agitated, less tense, and I can deal with whatever the situation is. And a lot of times I find out then there really isn't a conflict. I'm just reacting.
Could I comment on that real quick?
Yes,
Yeah.
thanks, James.
Yes, because you just done something that's very powerful. Because you mentioned earlier, taking that breath, right? And that's part of it. But like Danny was bringing up, how so many of these things we get coded into our physical body, because we aren't just a spirit with a body. We are in spirited body, right? Our body is part of who we are. And so all these things are bound up in that. And so when we feel that tension and what the volume or the aggression, the adrenaline's pumping, all these things are happening physiologically, right? Those are clues that we're getting agitated or feeling a sense of conflict, right? But it's not just an indicator. If you calm down those indicators, that actually calms down the actual anger and the defensiveness and the sense of conflict and the stress, which is why taking that breath helps calm you down spiritually and mentally, because you can't keep a tight chest when you've taken a relaxing breath, right? If you actively focus on relaxing the muscles in your neck, if you actively lower your voice, those things actually calm you down mentally so that you can then engage solution-oriented mindset, using your body as a tool in that sense, not just use it as an indicator. It's the thermostat, not just a thermometer.
Ooh, I like that. Thermostat, yes. calm myself down and turn down the thermostat a little bit before I react. Who else has comment?
I do.
Yes, Judy. Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa.
Oh, thank you. So I was also in Mary and Cheryl's group, and what made me feel safe enough to share, you have all mentioned things about how we speak. And so, of course, Mary wasn't agitated. She wasn't upset or angry. She wasn't speaking loudly or quickly, or any of those. Wonderful. But the next layer down for me is how someone, or sorry, what they say. Not just how they say it, but what are they saying? So in my experience, I have a family member who will be so adamant about their point of view and that it's right. It's not that they are speaking in an agitated manner, but I can tell from the words that they're using and their point of view that they are so tied to their position that I almost feel if I say something opposing that, I will be somehow attacking their sense of being. And so I will choose not to say something. And so I didn't have any of that in this group. And so I felt safe to say a viewpoint or suggest a solution that was on either side of the discussion.
I think that's a great point, Lisa. I find that I have, maybe myself, I do that, and my relatives seem to do that, that we have an opinion and we want to stick with our opinion. And I wonder if anyone has any thoughts about in what way you can say something without it sounding like you think you know it all and you're right about it for sure. And if there's just a way to phrase it so that you find out what the other person thinks and you want to know what they're thinking, but you don't want it to come across as your, I don't know, the conflict and trying to find out from them in a way that is, I don't even know how to word it, but just sometimes we come across, even though we really do kind of want to find out how the other person feels or what they're thinking, it's just hard to ask them without it coming across being like a know-it-all or something. Does anyone have any ideas on that?
I don't know. It
Danny?
sounds like Judy has something, but I don't know if you mind. Do you mind if I share my screen for that bridge or barrier thing? Not for me to talk about it. I'll just put it up there, and that might.
Yeah, please do. Right.
So Judy, you had something?
Well, I was going to say, I statements help. For me, this works, or I think, or if it's something that's subjective, you can even say that. I know it's subjective, but that was really a great movie. And so that they're open to say, well, I didn't really like it because. Aha.
I hadn't had a chance to read over these. I printed it out, but this has lots of great ideas, doesn't it? Exactly what I was asking for. Thank you, Danny. Yes. Let's talk. Yeah.
With these kinds of phrases, it reminds me of Benjamin Franklin. There was in his autobiography, he talks about how he took an experiment and he decided for a time to not assert anything just baldly. He always framed it in some kind of softening phrase, like, in my experience, I have on occasion observed that, and all these different kinds of things. And he suddenly noticed he was just accidentally persuading people of stuff. And just he was this is very strange. And so he started experimenting. He just randomly persuade people of things that he didn't even believe in, just to see if he could. This isn't nice. I should probably stop doing that. But it was just, he was so people forgot to be defensive around him because he was so unassuming that he was still able to present his case, even though it might seem, wishy-washy in a sense, but no, he was able to present his case, but make people more willing to listen. It makes a huge difference.
That's great, James. I think I do know people who do put all of, their words and have it be that way. And they just seem to come across so much more agreeable, and that you want to listen to them more and want to be more open. And I would like to do that. So that's going to be my takeaway. I'm going to try doing that more.
Speaking of
And Cynthia, go ahead real quickly. And we have a red flag. So I'm going to let you be the last comment.
well, because of the red flag, I was going to transition into to say
right.
Thank you for your
I will
takeaways.
send it back to you.
It was great. Thank you for your takeaway session, Sherry. You did an awesome job. I appreciate you for hosting that. It's not even knowing exactly what it was. So we do the evaluation now, and then we go to business meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to Mary.
All right. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for the effort you put into tonight's meeting. This was a one-of-a-kind design for us. And one of the things I so appreciate about Sound Advice is our members' willingness to experiment a bit with, so that we can get the most out of a topic. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of call on people as I see you on my screen so I can get feedback from everybody. We have a total of 10 minutes for this section. So if you would keep your comment to a minute, and you're welcome to pass. But I'm going to just say first, I'm going to let you know, like I'm going to say James and then Danny, could I get yours? And I'll say Danny, Rosanna, so that you all know you're coming up. So James, feedback on tonight's meeting.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mary. I really enjoyed this. Cynthia did a great job finding an excellent speaker who provided some really excellent content that's right in line with the kind of content that we at Sound Advice like to provide. This is really practical, really helpful. You gave opportunities for exercises to come in. So Danny, excellent job on planning and coordination on this. It just lines perfectly up with what we're doing, and well coordinated, Cynthia. And of course, there were challenges with the technical issues in the first bit, but you managed it really well. I mean, it's a challenge juggling everything on a laptop, but you did well job. Very good job, Danny. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Danny, followed by Rosanna.
The meeting tonight was really one of a kind of experience for me at a Toastmasters meeting. I really appreciate being able to come to an advanced club and experience this atmosphere with you all of openness and willingness to engage, and for the flexibility. It's great to see everybody still growing and learning and supporting each other in this environment. Thank you for making it comfortable for someone who is a newer Toastmaster to be able to come in and present and grow and learn. So that's my feedback for the meeting tonight. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Danny. Rosanna, followed by Judy.
I learned something tonight. When, as a leader, I expect my group to have examples of whatever scenario we're talking about, I would never have thought to bring a list of already prepared scenarios. In my breakout room, I had no idea what past conflict I could use as an example. And Danny had a list of scenarios. I think she said 27. I don't know where that number comes from, but we go through 27 conflicts in a day. And Danny had a list of scenarios that we could use. And we actually got through 2 out of 3 of the examples she shared. So as a leader, to be prepared for my students, or followers to participate, I wouldn't have thought about that. I really liked the slides and the Google documents that were just there, but I could still focus on what Danny was saying. So it was not a distraction. And I liked that Danny admitted there's so much going on in the chat. I like that she could just cut it, cut the chat, acknowledge she sees the chat being engaged, and just keep going.
All right, nicely stated. Judy, followed by Cheryl.
Thank you, Mary. A very good meeting. Danny, as I said, you kept it interactive, which is hard to do on Zoom, and you did a good job of that. It's very hard to listen to one person for a whole half hour. So bringing us all in was really kept me engaged, and our small group where you have the scenarios went very well. And everyone stayed in time, relatively on time. Very well structured meeting. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you, Judy. Cheryl, followed by Lisa.
Yes, this is a fantastic meeting tonight. I liked the format, how you came up with the structure. It was really great. I always like the breakouts where you have a chance to kind of take the information you learned or take whatever was spoken on and apply it. And it gives you a chance to kind of learn and kind of get it in your brain of how to do something. And so that was just a perfect setup for the whole meeting. And I just love, we're a small group here. There's not very many here, but I think from what I could tell, we all got engaged in the whole thing. And I appreciate Danny coming in as a guest speaker and doing this for us, because this was a great meeting that I know will help all of us.
Terrific. Thank you, Cheryl. Lisa, then Sherry.
Thanks, Mary. So this is my first meeting, first time at an advanced club as well. So very different format, of course, than a regular Toastmasters meeting. I don't know how this format differs from your regular format, but I really enjoyed it regardless. And I have to say, after a full day of Zoom meetings, I really thought twice about whether I wanted to spend another 2 hours in my evening on Zoom. But I am really glad that I did, because the 2 hours really has gone by very quickly, and this has been very interactive and very engaging. I love the presentation and the slides, the topic being so relevant for all of us, whether it's in our personal lives or our professional lives. I definitely have I wrote down a lot of notes, and I have taken a lot of takeaways with me. So thank you for that.
Terrific. Thank you. But I'm getting a message. My internet connection is unstable. So I'll let you know it's Sherry, Cynthia, and Debbie in case you lose me. Continue on.
And thank you, Mary. I'm really glad you're here, Lisa. Good. Welcome to the meeting, and hope you'll come back. And Danny, thank you for coming and giving that presentation. So many people have said what a great job you did. And so I'm reiterating that, but your handouts were really terrific. And I definitely will make use of those, especially that bridger barrier. And I just love that everybody is so engaged in contributing to the chat and to the breakouts and things like that. So thank you for this group. It's great, great meeting.
All right, Cynthia, then Debbie.
I enjoyed all of it. I really liked the structure. It was an experiment, and I think it went really well. Thank you, Danny, so much for coming and saving my bacon. You do not know what a big favor you have done for me, but it is a great one. And I'm liking hearing that everybody enjoyed it. And I liked the speech. I liked the samples. I liked the breakout. I liked it's almost over. Success for my first time out of the box. I'm happy.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Debbie.
All right, thank you, Mary. I have enjoyed the meeting as well. My first comment, just as Danny was starting, was wow, what a great slide to start off with, because it was both neutral and yet it conveyed the message of not being happy with each other, you know, and yet we had no actual face or things to apply any type of things that we're carrying from our past to be applied to the gesture of either of those people. And I thought, well, that was excellent, because if you chose an actual person, judgment can come in. I also liked that the look and feel of that theme also carried through. The second page also had an image of a stick person, but now they were facing forward to us. And so immediately you built some trust because your slide was already showing themselves to have been quality, and that they're going to flow well for us. I then went into saying, I love the engagement. I'm on my, not showing everybody my video, because when I go to my trio meetings, they're just like, oh my gosh, you look like you're living in a dungeon down there. And so this is where my office is all day long. And it doesn't feel like a dungeon, but apparently when the rest of you look behind me, it appears as such. So hearing the engagement today was quite nice. And I see I've got a red, so I'll be real quick. Breakout rooms, thank you, loved it. I saw overt gestures to hand off smoothly, and that was a quality that came out from the coordination with Cynthia on planning this meeting, and really appreciated the round robin evaluation. Back to you, Mary.
All right, thank you all for your feedback. It was, I found, very unique from each person, so I really appreciated that. Kudos to you, Cynthia. A well-designed meeting. I'll go back to what Lisa said, doesn't feel like 2 hours. And that is a tribute to the how well designed the meeting was, and the how well your speaker met the goals of sharing with us information, the tips that we could really use about conflict. So thank you, Danny. Thank you, Cynthia. Both of you sounded a little bit like it was a little bit of an experiment for you, and I would say it was one that was very successful. From my perspective, conflict is one of the issues that leaders have to get used to, have to emerge, actually. If leaders don't emerge conflict, you can't have a good, safe environment really at work, and people can't bring their best. So well-chosen topic. My disappointment, of course, is we don't have more people. I think we need to do a better job of promoting. And I'm going to say, I know we have a VPPR, but it is not solely up to the VPPR to promote our club and its activities. And I'm going to say this a little selfishly, because next month is my turn to lead the session. And I want my speakers to have a great audience. So we need to come up with some better promotions of our club and its efforts, because I think each speaker that we have, they're such high quality, and our meetings are such high quality. We deserve it as members and as guests. So let's work on that collectively. Let us know. VPPR will put you a little on the spot to say, let us know how we can help. It's not up to you on your own. It is up to all of us collectively to be able to do that. My big phrase for the night is probably your body keeps the score. And if I remember nothing else from my interactions with conflict is going to be my body keeps the score. So I appreciate whoever said that. I'm not even sure who it was, but I do appreciate you saying that. And with that, will ask our timer, how did we do tonight? Judy?
We all stayed in time. I timed Danny's speech precisely at 31 minutes, 5 seconds. That included answering the question. Everything else was in time. I think the general evaluation we're a little bit over that we wanted to be, but we're okay. We've got plenty of time for the rest of the meeting. Good job, everybody.
All right, thank you, Judy. Appreciate that. And I think I'll just turn it to Cynthia in case she has some final words before she can hand it over to James for the business portion. Back to you, Cynthia.
Thank you. I don't. I think we should do the business portion.
All right. Well, I do want to make sure that we give a resounding applause to Cynthia for her first time doing this. We've had Rosanna and Cynthia both do their first times as discussion leaders recently, and you guys both did fantastic jobs. And I'm so proud of you. And I'm proud of our club for supporting each of you in doing this and making it happen and supporting you along the way. So well done, both of you, for jumping in there and doing this. It's hard when we have a smaller club to push and do all the stuff that needs to get done, particularly with a club that's focused on leaders who are trying to grow as leaders, which means busy people. So we're all very busy people doing very busy things. And so making the time, because this is also an advanced club, so this isn't our only Toastmasters club. And so we're busy with other Toastmasters things as well. And so there's a lot on all of our plates. And so being able to pull off something of this high quality and this high caliber is a tremendous accomplishment in and of itself. So thank you all so much for participating and then promoting it and reaching out and making it happen. So thank you so much, Danny, for coming, and Lisa for joining us as a guest. I'm really glad to see you here. And thank you so much for participating and engaging in this content here. I do want to give a personal invite to everyone here, particularly Danny and Lisa, to register for our next meeting. We just have the bare Eventbrite set up there right now, but you can register at it for our next meeting, which is going to be focused on mentorship, which is a really valuable topic. And the next one after that is going to be on onboarding, onboarding new members, not just for Toastmasters clubs, but also just for new team members and things like that. And we've got other topics coming down the line that are all focused around leadership improvement and growth in those ways. And I also want to just highlight that one of the things that we really enjoy here and growing in is that not just coming in and being able to participate and learn these great subjects, but being able to be part of putting on these events is a huge learning process. Like Cynthia was teamed up with Mary to help her walk her through this whole process. I helped Rosanna with the last one. We pair up each discussion leader with somebody else to help walk them through the process and be able to call on their resources to be able to connect and research and do things. And so we learn a lot and we gain a lot of value from that as well as members as we're growing in this. So if you're interested in an advanced club where you can learn alongside other experienced high caliber leaders, this is the club for that. This is the club for that. So consider this my personal invite. If you are so inclined to add a little bit more onto your plate, we will help you. And you'll become a stronger person by doing so. So I want to give that personal invite to you and to share and let other people know about what all we're doing here, because I think there's a lot of people who could really benefit from what we're doing here with this club. I'm really proud of it. Is there anything else that anybody would like to bring up? Judy.
Could our guests tell us where they're from, what their clubs are, and a bit about themselves?
I would love to hear from that. Lisa.
Sure, thank you. I am from the Growth Masters Club up in Burien.
I like that name, Growth Masters.
Yes, I do too. It's the only club I've been a member of. I was a member of it for 8 years. I'm still a member of it. However, I've moved down to the Tacoma area now, and therefore I'm looking for a new club that is more local. Although everyone is meeting online. These days, so even though we already had the good farewell party for me as I moved, I still am attending those club meetings simply because they're online. But I do really want to find a club down in this area, and this one popped out at me, and here I am.
Wow, fantastic. A lot of our members are still in the Tacoma area. I'm in North Dakota, which is, ways away. We're scattered a bit hither and yon, but yeah, we do kind of a home base around that area. So if you ever go hybrid in the future, or we did vote to go digital. So if we ever do have a hybrid meeting, it'll probably end up being here and there. We will be probably in that Tacoma area anyway. But we're glad to have you here. Speaking of, this is your first advanced club you mentioned, right?
Yes, correct.
First one that you visited, yeah. And different advanced clubs do different things very differently. You notice we didn't have table topics. We didn't have verbal, speech evaluations. We had a very long speech with breakout rooms. So it was more of an event. And that's one of the things that I'm seeing with a lot, at least in this district, a lot of the advanced clubs do that. They have like an event focus basically for each meeting. We take the theme idea and just kind of write that large. And so each meeting is marketed independently, and each one has a particular focus, and they're strategically built around a particular concept. And each meeting has a different format based off of that need. So some of it may be, a multi-panel member thing. Some of it may be multiple speeches. Some of it maybe, a debate format, more exercises. We've done large presentations like this. We've done a lot of different formats, and it's kind of up to the discussion leader what they feel is best for that particular topic. So you get a lot of variety out of it, which I really like. Gives you opportunity to do a lot of high level pathways projects as well. Very handy that way.
So you found us then through TI's website. You were looking for a club in Tacoma.
Fantastic. Okay. And did you know Mary beforehand? I think Mary met, who was it mentioned? No? Okay. I thought you might have known her beforehand. So did you know anybody else here beforehand?
No, not at all.
Wow. Yeah. You're a brave soul. It was great to have you. It is great to have you.
Thank you.
All right. And Danny, is this your first time visiting Sound Advice, or have you been here before? I think you've been here before.
I think I presented my international.
Yes, that's what it was. We gave you feedback for it in prep for speaking for the contest.
Yes.
That's what it was. I knew I'd seen you here.
Lots of valuable feedback from this group, and I appreciate that. So I do see quite a few familiar faces. Oh, thank you. That was still a whirlwind. We're getting ready to talk about club contests coming up here soon, right?
True.
And I'm getting a little of maybe trauma from all of the ups and downs of the speech contest last year. But
oh my goodness, yeah. It was an adventure.
It was definitely an adventure. One I didn't plan for, but was amazing, and I think led me here tonight. So my home club is Commerce Communicators. It's a corporate club at the Department of Commerce, and Cheryl and Cynthia are both members of that club and mentors to me. I took on the club president role this year, and I am learning so much and really enjoying just the experience with stepping into leadership and just scratching the surface of all of the different things that Toastmasters International offers. It's just so much. It's a big torrent. So I really appreciate it.
Fantastic. Well, we'd love to have you visit again and see you around here more often. You're a great addition. So thank you so much.
And you both know that Mary is our vice president membership.
Yes.
You can.
I am sure you'll be hearing from her.
Yeah.
And Sherry, You have something. You popped in chat your link to one of your other
Yes,
clubs.
we
as
were
well.
talking about how different advanced clubs
Yes.
operate. And Advancing Alaska Club meets on the fourth Monday, and it has speeches, 2 speakers, but we have 4 evaluators for each speech. So one is the verbal, the visual, and the content, and then someone evaluates the actual pathway speech. So you get really good at getting in-depth feedback on your speeches, but you also learn about good evaluations and how you can incorporate those. And it helps in the evaluation contest too. So come and join us next Monday.
Yeah. And if we're showing off our different advanced, because I have to put in Nerd Masters. If you haven't heard of Nerd Masters, we are exploring the intersection of technology, communication, leadership, and nerdly pop culture. So we have topics ranging from technology, with the next one on February 2nd. So we meet the first Wednesday of the month, is an innovation fair. So we'll actually be competing to see like a science fair kind of idea, but with technology and how to improve Toastmasters clubs with new technologies and things. And then March is going to be on history. So it's going to be nerding out about history. And then April 6th will be an Eventbrite masterclass, which I actually do recommend for everybody to sign up for that one, because you'll be learning how to use Eventbrite effectively, specifically the free features for how to do your Toastmasters events more effectively using Eventbrite, because it is a bit of a complicated beastie. So we've done masterclasses on Zoom, how to do contests, a lot of those, a lot of trainings, a lot of presentations like that, specifically around particular technologies. And then we just have fun and nerd out every once in a while because we can't help ourselves. So that's a fun resource to join. Even if you don't want to join, that's okay. But be warned, if you visit a few times, you will end up being assimilated in one way or another. Well, with that, I think we should be able to call it an evening. And thank you all so much for being here again. And well done again to Cynthia.